Good afternoon, everyone. Again, um, myself and my colleague Ying, we're both professors at the University College of the North, and as part of our commitment to supporting our students in their learning, we started a journal, a student-oriented journal that we call Music from the North. And so today's presentation will be focused on the seventh issue of the journal. I will speak a lot about most of this is already in my platform. I'm just trying to give you some background into this, and then it's based on the seventh issue of the journal, and we have a specific theme, which is the COVID-19 in relation to how that affects our students in their learning. So before we go on, we would like to first acknowledge that that the University College of the North and its employees are grateful to be invited guests on the traditional territories of Muskogee and Innuok, or the Cree, Swampy Cree signers of Treaty 5. We also have regional centers on the territories, the traditional territories of Dene and the Sotios, Ojibwe and Anishinaabe and Métis nations. Okay. So, Music from the North is a student-oriented journal that we created in 2017, myself and Dr. Ying. The main idea behind it is to provide a publication platform for our students at the university to showcase their musings about living and studying in northern Manitoba, and sometimes we also want to know about their reflections on their Indigenous traditions and their culture. Both Ying and I are first generation immigrants that are Canadians also, and it's our pleasure to see how we can bring expertise to support our students in terms of, I have my background in linguistics, while Dr. Ying, on the other hand, is in English literature, but we both teach writing, and we thought that this would be a beautiful thing to do with our students. And yeah, so far we have published 7 issues of this student-oriented journal, and we accept materials from different genres: poetry, play, prose, and different essays from different modes of writing: reflective, explanatory, argumentative, reportorial. And before the 7th issue, all the issues that we have published until now are taking articles from random topics, random themes, but the 7th issue, based on what we're going through, the whole world is experiencing at this time, we decided to make it a theme-specific one. And in that light, we decided that we wanted a collection that is based on the students' reflections on the COVID-19 pandemic. So far, this is just a sample of the print version of the journal. These are the first 4 issues that we have, because the journal comes out and we have the online version. We also have the print version. The idea behind the print version is that we use it we use it as so that our students will have a hard copy of the material in their hand, and it's been the feedback that we've been receiving regarding the print version. It's been awesome. Students are proud to take some of this the published version home, the print version home, to show to parents and loved ones, and we want to keep that tradition going. And so far, we have been receiving support from a seed funding that we had with the university, through which we were able to fund the printing of the print version. And then later on, we started receiving support from the Dean of the Faculty of Education and Faculty of Arts. And we're happy that they're already trying to include that in the budgets going forward at UCN. And it's highly inspiring to all of us. And then the online version is always available online. There's a slide here has a link to the homepage of the online version, which is embedded within the UCN website. The majority of our published students are Indigenous students. They self-identify as Indigenous, which is also a reflection of the demographic of the community. Submitted articles go through rigorous revisions and editing before the final draft is published. And I want to speak to that a little bit. We also use the opportunity to get some students involved. It's not just myself and Dr. Ying doing all the editing and the students. We have some students who work with us as a team, so they also take time to provide feedback on students' writing and before they go through us, and then we take a look at it, and then yeah, that's how the publication process goes. Published works are sometimes used as model essays by instructors. Sometimes since it's easily accessible via the internet, the digital versions of the journal. Published works have become sources for motivation and inspiration also for students and faculty. Recently, one of our published student writers got the recognition by the Manitoba Association of Retired Teachers, and they offered to publish one of her articles in, I think that was published in the 4th issue of the journal, and they published it in a book form, which they're currently distributing across grade 5 and grade 6 pupils at Manitoba schools. And that goes to show that the level of reception of music from the North in the community. This is the book itself. So if at some point you come across a book that looks like that, that's the book, and that's the student herself. Her name is Brie Phillips. Okay, so I want to shift gears now. I want to look at how COVID-19 impacted the everyday running or life at UCN. When the whole thing started at UCN, mid-March 2020, the university pivoted to virtual teaching. UCN, before the COVID outbreak, because of the very wide geographical space that UCN caters to, we have a situation where we are already at UCN, instructors are already teaching both face-to-face and via video conferencing to students. So we have platforms that we've been using before now, especially using through normal video conferencing and Adobe Connect. And then when COVID hit, UCN had to procure licenses for the virtual classroom, which is embedded within our learning management system and Zoom meeting. And so the IT department did a great job trying to prep every instructor towards the migration to a virtual platform. And in the process, instructors had all these things available, and they had to make a choice as to which of these platforms would work well with them. And so we had all the manpower there, we had all the tools, but the question would be, how prepared were the students to undertake remote learning? And so we look at the situation at UCN. First, the student population is largely mature, and the population of students also are a larger percentage of our students, their parents. There is also the lack of strong, reliable internet connection in rural Manitoba. Then we also know the issue of unsuitable living conditions that students will find themselves in, especially remote reserve, on the reserve. And all these things factor into whether or not the students are kind of prepared for the move towards a virtual classroom. So, and we as editors at Muses from the North decided that we would like to hear from the students. We have all, UCN have done a fantastic job in terms of manpower, resources, tools, but how about the students? What's their own story? And so we thought that we would like to hear them share whatever is their reflections regarding the new environment that they've been thrown into. We wanted to find out how much COVID-19 has interrupted their lives and their career aspirations. We wanted to know what coping mechanisms they themselves have managed to put in place in order to adjust to this new normal. We wanted to explore what their motivations were, if any, moving forward with the remote learning. Is it something that they would really want to go on with, or something that they would rather wish to forget? And so this is the drive. This is the reason we decided that we wanted a theme-specific production of music from the North, a collection of reflections. So with the 7th issue, the structure is as follows. It is theme-specific, as I've already mentioned, to address the topic of COVID-19 and students' challenges. We accepted 12 articles in the end. Out of the 12, 9 are personal reflections on the COVID-19, and 3 were research papers. And of all the 12 articles, all were written by 9 students. So we had students that submitted 2 articles that were accepted. If you have a look at the content, for the first time, our 7th issue came up as a PDF because we're still trying to do something with the UCN webpage, and that kind of affected the way it is produced this time. Otherwise, the previous issues have always been easily navigable, that you could go and just click on the article that you want, but with this one, it's a PDF file. But if you take a look, if you have the opportunity of looking at the 7th issue, you'll see that some of the students that had 2 articles submitted, they have like a 1-page short paper and then a full-page paper. So we had 9 students that submitted 12 works. 5 of our 9 authors self-identified as Indigenous. And interestingly, all 5 of them are Cree. So that's the website of Music from the North. If you go to the UCN website, ucn.ca, and on the website, you will see to the bottom right corner, you'll find Music from the North. There, if you click on it, it will take you to all the issues that we have produced so far. So at this stage, I want to look at what are the most common things in the students' reflections on COVID-19. So we are able to identify the most common, or the things that is common in almost all the papers. The first is adjusting to the non-traditional medium of learning. The second will be balancing family life with studies. The third is working while studying at home. The fourth is managing mental health and well-being. So each of these things we're going to be exploring in the following slides. So the first thing that we find very common is the adjusting to a non-traditional medium of learning, face-to-face as against sitting by the computer or virtual or remote learning. So learning in a virtual environment is characterized by the following challenges for our students. Number one, coping with new technologies, which also has the added challenge of different instructors using different platforms. I remember when I taught towards the end of term 30 in 2020, I used the virtual classroom, which is embedded within the LMS, the learning management system. But by the time we came back in fall, I switched to Zoom. So at that time, you had instructors who would use different platforms, and students will come and for a different course, they're using a different platform. For another course, they're using a different platform, and that's one challenge. Another challenge is buying something like a computer under the code red restrictions. We have these computers were timed when some shops or some materials like these, like computers, fall under the non-essential. And there is a particular student writer who was like, it was a very big issue, and the student had to work out of her phone for some time before the laptop that she ordered was delivered after some time. And that also brought about a setback in her progress, in her academic progress. Electronic information overload, yes. And this one, almost every student was like, yes, this is important, because through all the whole digital sphere or space, there's so much to process, there's so much to get used to, there's so much to, and that is also a very common theme in their works, in their writing. And then the non-conventional medium of instruction, which has reduced engagement, and then the etiquette that goes with how to interact in a virtual classroom. Should I talk? Should I ask a question? How do I comport myself? All that also factors into part of the things that the students thought about. Then the lack of a sense of community. That's the lack of interaction between student and student. Our generation of students, when we were in school, we loved the fact that we could interact with fellow students, and this also was something that really featured in their writing. And then the poor internet connection, like I've alluded to before, and with what's going on here in northern Manitoba, and then the concerns about attending post-secondary school after a sustained or extended hiatus. We had students who had come from, they've been away from school for a long time, and now they're coming back, and then they've been thrown into something that looked very untraditional. So you had that cross that's been going on in between. A student who had been out of school 20 years ago, coming back, would expect to still go back to school and sit in a classroom and have a face-to-face interaction with an instructor. No, but the student is thrown into something very, very new and strange. And that also is another thing that featured in their papers. So the other thing that featured is the balancing of family life and remote learning. One thing with our students, like I mentioned earlier, a significant number of parents. So juggling the parental responsibility and remote learning, that reveals its own set of challenges. For example, supporting younger children with their homework. There is the closure, schools were closed down, and children were at home. That's the younger ones were at home with the student parent, and they have homework that they're supposed to do, and the parent student is also trying to get their work done also. Also providing care for younger ones who were forced to stay home due to the closure of daycare. So we have that also as a very big challenge. We have situations where a virtual classroom is ongoing, and student parent will sit with a child by the computer or running around trying to take care of, because the child could not be at daycare. And also there's this struggle to bring about some quietness in the house, in the room, while the class is going on. And then finding motivation for two people. That's the parents, and then for the younger children. In one of the writing, the student would say something like, the child is no longer motivated to even want to study anymore, do homework anymore, because they were no longer finding this an easy thing, staying home and staying behind the screen and learning. It's so much, just so much a burden, and that also featured in some of the work. And then taking turns at home to use the internet or even to use a device. The child wants to sit by the desktop computer to get some work done, and the child or the mom, the student parent, also wants to do the same. So it's just important that while people are doing so, while schools or institutions are putting things in place, there is also this other side, the student and their life. And that also, it's important. And it's also, we're so glad that we were able to see through the students' own eyes with regard to how they're able to manage with the challenges. So another thing that I want to talk about that also featured is the working while taking remote learning at home. In northern Manitoba, we know for sure that the majority of our students work to support their families, and they're also students. And that also impacted their lives, their daily life. Everything's been going on in a certain direction, and then suddenly there is a change in the whole setup. Some students also had to work more than about 2 or more jobs because of the reduction in work hours due to the pandemic. Some students had to learn new skills in order to still be able to do something and provide for family. Some students were forced to work from home, which itself created a new set of challenges, like having to work longer hours. Uh, More than what they could have done if they had been sitting down in their office. That also featured in some of our students' writing, where like if I had to spend more time doing the same task that I could have done easily while at work. Um, then the improvisation of a workstation, converting the dining area to a place to work and also study. So as a result of these situations, there is also there's a request for extensions for in order to complete assignments, and there are missing deadlines, and then also in some cases failing to submit assignments because all these factors into all that. So irrespective of whatever thing that we may have prepared, thinking that we have everything laid down, students have their own challenges that they struggle with in their daily lives regarding this whole transition. And the most important, I would say, for my point of view, is the aspect of managing mental health and well-being of the students. Um, you would read in the papers, you would read in their writing how they allude to this, but this is absolutely very, very important. So there's the deliberate and conscious thoughts that are ascribed by the writers to the mental health. This will include, and these are triggered by things like isolation from family members for so long, especially those family members that do not live in the same house with them. There's also the concern for family members' safety, especially for those students who work as frontline workers or those who wait tables at restaurants in town. There's also the lack of a change of environment or atmosphere and the inability to socialize with others. The overwhelming feeling of information overload also, that is absolutely important. Then the pressure that comes with being laid off from work. Some in the process, like we said, because of the pandemic and certain jobs, certain restaurants had to close down at some point, and so many lost their job. So having said all that, we are also happy to see that in their writing, our students were also able to tell us about how they cope, how they manage to cope. And in this next few slides, what we've done is we just use their own, lift the students' own words and look at how they, especially those expressions in their materials, in their writing that has to do with how well they cope with the situation. The first that I'd like to talk about is by Garrison in page 35 of the 70 issue. So getting support from other students. According to this student, I'm going to read what the student says. It says, I was in a class where we did a group project. I was so thankful for fellow students who knew how to use document sharing programs. Getting support from other students. Those students who are savvy with certain programs are able to support the others, and it's a coping mechanism. With that, they're able to go on. Another one is finding the time to just simply reflect. Mackenzie says, reflecting on what really matters in this life have all been fundamental in helping me overcome the feelings of sadness and loneliness that creep in from time to time. Okay, just the ability to sit back and reflect. And in this particular student's writing, she says something like, that there's the good side of this whole thing, that I'm able to just have some time to stay at home and just sit back and reflect, and that is therapeutic. In my own, this is me paraphrasing her idea, therapeutic to my well-being. Another student talks about going full time all the way. So this is by Nelson Whitehead. She says, on the bright side, the COVID-19 situation served as a motivating factor for me to prepare to take on another full-time course load for this academic school year. Like, okay, yeah, since I'm home, since this is going on, yeah, I'm going to do this. And that itself is motivating to encourage the student to want to do more. Okay? And Chevillard, in her own writing, she talks about focusing on the positive, and these are her words. So why some people find them masked, inconvenient, and then resisting wearing them, I believe face masks are helpful and they are indispensable if we are to curb the spread of the virus and overcome this pandemic. So that's a positive spin to a situation that looked like depressing. And also we have another student who talks about we have asking for and receiving help from instructors. Okay, and this is Primrose. Primrose says, I started off wondering how I'm going to learn all of these during online schooling. It has turned out that I have awesome instructors who help me to overcome all the setbacks during this time. Okay, it's so good to see that the support does not only come from student to student, we also have instructors also supporting students through the whole challenge. And these are positives, these are coping skills, that mechanisms that the student have come to realize in the middle of all the change. This one is kind of like my favorite because it's it's beautiful. It's also funny and it's relaxing. Garson also says, which I title "Overlooking Embarrassing in Quote Situations." My firstborn is set to graduate high school next year, and I'm hoping he attends UCN too. I started questioning myself about coming back to university, okay, because there's been a sustained long time that she's been there, and now she's going back, and the child is also coming. And if you follow her article, the next line that follows is something like asking herself whether she and her son will be in the same class, you know, and it's just her overlooking the embarrassment and saying, no, I am still going on in spite of that, and it's such a happy story. It's such a very happy story. Finally, expressing gratitude. By the same Garson, she says, thanks to online learning, I can continue my education while keeping my job and managing my family life. Okay. In spite of all that, in spite of all the situation, she still finds a reason to be thankful, and we like that because it also releases this good feeling in the person. So we want to conclude with the following remarks, and which we think will be important going forward. That institutions and other stakeholders, such as funders, sponsors, instructors, all of them, need to consider the students' total well-being in all decisions. Like, it's not like from the third point that it's not just enough to provide all the best materials or tools that will be necessary for a drastic change from a to a non-traditional medium or mode of learning. It is not just enough to focus all our energies on getting all these things in place. It's also important that we think about the students in terms of their well-being and how all this the change itself will affect them. They are an absolutely important part of the equation of all the things that we need to consider. And so these are just all three remarks put there. And we also say that student stories, they offer us a glimpse into some of the underpinning issues that are capable of truncating the academic goals during a disruptive event such as a pandemic. So that is why we think that's one of the beautiful things with this reflective collection of reflective essays, because it helps us to see through the eyes of our students, the one that we claim to cater to in all that we do at various institutions. Okay, but if we have a reason, if we have an opportunity to hear from them and see all that they're going through and stuff, it helps us to come to this final point, which I call flexibility. We need to learn, institutions, instructors, all stakeholders need to learn to be flexible with the students, okay? How can we be flexible without undermining academic integrity? Okay, this is key. This is key to motivation. This is key to the ultimate success of the student. And if I try to talk about flexibility in this context, I will going to talk about bending over backwards sometimes to accommodate late submissions, and we cannot still use the same set of rules that we had during when things were okay and apply to when things are what they are now. There should be, I'm happy with what, like last year, UCN, we had to extend, the institution had to extend the date for voluntary deadlines. That is a sign for flexibility. It moved a lot back into the end of the term. And instructors too can also try to understand what might be going on with the student and try to know when an assignment is due, and then try to be flexible in terms of granting extensions. And so things like that may be very useful. So I suppose at this stage, I want to turn the rest to my colleague Ying. She has the vote of thanks or acknowledgement that she has. Hello, Ying. Hello.
Hi, this is Ying, and I'm professor of Indigenous Literature of the University College of the North. And Joseph had already gave you a good idea of what we have done for the specific issue about students' reflection on the COVID-19. And the idea started with that because it's almost like overnight that we changed the idea from face-to-face teaching move to remote teaching. And I remembered on the 11th of March, I just came back from Norway House and the PA. And then on the 17th, we started to move almost without seeing students and teaching online. And you wouldn't imagine the difficulty unless you were in that situation. Because once students switch to online remote learning, basically we cannot see students. And the difficulty for students on the reserve, they don't have a good computer with a camera, with a microphone. So students sometimes just, they text you in the chat saying, I am here, but I don't have a microphone. I don't have a camera, so I cannot see. And sometimes for a whole term, you cannot see students. And of course, from the reaction, you don't know how well they receive the lecture. So that's one thing that we feel very difficult to teach remote without seeing students. Another thing is that most of the students, we still called oral, from oral culture. They would like to interact with a professor face-to-face and orally. And suddenly we switch online, and everything we have to communicate through email, through a course website. So students said we just don't have the habit to type everything that we have to speak into words. And I can understand the whole situation. And you would think before we run this specific issue, I would think students will have complaints, will talk about the setbacks of remote teaching. But fortunately, when we received students' submissions, we saw most of the students very positive. And I really feel appreciate that students, our Indigenous students, you never feel they are aggressive, but the resilience they have, whatever the difficulty they have, they don't complain. They accepted what they are given and they try to cope with. So when they don't have that camera, when they don't have the microphone, and then they still, you can see that they are still with you because with our course website, you see that students logged in and then still follow the instruction to do. Of course, some of them have special issues, the connectivity in the reserves, but the positive attitude, I feel so grateful because we instructors sometimes complain how difficult to carry on remote teaching. But for our students, they are more positive, I think, than us in a way. And another thing that I feel difficult is the editing process without seeing students, without students have the facility on campus. Before that, when we added students' essay or submission, students use university computer and then they have the Word program. But when they have their own computer, the computer program is so out of date. And I used the editing program. They even could not open it and then they couldn't see it. So when you want to give them instructions and then to ask them to see the margin, they even cannot do it. So with that difficulty that we can see, remote learning is not easy for our Indigenous students on the reserve. However, I think there are some students who cannot catch up with online learning. I think most of the students catching up slowly. And to my surprise, I think 85% students would prefer online learning so far. And one of the students that he said during the whole pandemic, he was homeschooling and at the same time, he was babysitting his two babies. And without a convenience, he could not finish what he called homeschooling. And another student that Joseph already introduced, and she had been working for two jobs. She said, without remote online learning, I cannot go back to university. So with all these students coping with the COVID-19 effect, we call the negative effect, but students turned into motivation for going back to school. And this is what we could never think of this will happen during the difficult time. So that's my feeling of students' reflection. And we are so happy that we run this specific issue, but our students are so shy. When I talked with Ramona and saying that I want to invite students to this conference, and I emailed to all the writers and asked them whether they would like to share what they have written and with the audience, with the participants, all of them say, we are too shy, professor, you can talk for us. So that's our student. But they actually gave us inspiration for teaching. Yeah!